Hey everyone, welcome back to the React course, and I'm super excited to have you. In this lecture, we are going to talk about rendering in detail. And in the previous lecture, we talked about JSX and we looked at all the possible things that we could have. We referred the documentation and went from top to bottom throughout. And I'm going to follow that same approach in this lecture as well because I want to encourage you to look at the documentation and tell you that it's not hard to look at the documentation and read it by yourself. Now, I'm going to talk to you about rendering, and in this lecture, we are going to get a good idea of how React actually works and why React is powerful and why React is fast and why people like to work with it. So, the basic idea of rendering is that how React actually approaches making a React app and what are the components that are controlled by React and what are the components that are not controlled by React and they come from something elsewhere, say HTML, CSS or JavaScript. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. So without wasting any time, let's look at the code. So we are in our app.js file and I haven't touched this file from the last time. So it's exactly the same thing that we left it with. Now I want to get your attention back to something called index.js. So in this file, we have something called React DOM. Now this React DOM comes from a library called React DOM. Now this is also a library that comes with React. Now on this module, there is a method called render. Now what this render does is, it takes two parameters. It takes a component or a JSX element that is created via us. So basically we are creating something and we are letting it out as JSX. Then what we do is we actually do a DOM element capture, and this DOM element capture comes from a file that is sitting in our public directory and it's called index.html. Now the naming here is very specific and they don't want you to play with these names at all if you're doing standard React. But if you're doing something that you know and if you have experience and you know exactly what you are doing, then only you are supposed to change this. Elsewise, you're not supposed to touch these names because these names are very specific. That's how they get reference to each other. So the index.html file gets a reference inside index.js just because it's called index.html and it's meant to behave like that inside the React's build process. Okay, so this DOM element capture will only work if there is an index.html file. If there is no index.html file, then this won't work. Clearing that out, now let me tell you how this works. So basically, what is the idea behind React is, so let me just shrink everything that is not to utter use to us right now. I'm gonna shrink the head bit and I'm gonna shrink all this comments as well. I just want you to have your attention focused on something that is here. Now in my HTML file I only have a div and with id root, and I've closed that div. So I haven't actually gone ahead and put something inside my div. Now for a better sense of explanation, I'll also introduce a jargon term called single page applications that I also introduced you to in the introduction. So what is a single page app? At its core, a single page app is just a single web page. If you have done standard HTML, CSS, JavaScript web development, then you know a common website on today's day and age has multiple pages inside it. So you have a home page, then you might have a about page. Say it's a company portfolio, then you might have something called a blog or a user profile, and if say you have 10,000 users, then you have 10,000 different user profiles, and this chain continues on this metric that I'm talking about. For every different use case, you create a different page. Single page apps don't necessarily work like that. What they do is they ask you to give them exact specific information of as to what you want. Say you want to be on the home page, or you want to be on the about page, or you want to be on some other page. Then what they will do is they will go ahead and render only that bit that is responsible for that page. Now, single page apps, they don't have any refreshes because refreshes happen in the browser when you switch between page and page. But in this approach, you are going to stay on the same page. Whatever will happen on the same page depending on the conditional, and only that. What will happen is certain parts of the information will get changed. So say that I am on the about page and I am jumping to the blogs page. Then in that case, what will happen is I can actually go ahead and render all the components. Say this is my home page component, this is my about page component, and this is my blogs component. And if the condition is so that it's asking me to render the blog page component, then I'll only go ahead and put JavaScript conditionals, which will help me to only show that bit. Get my point? So React works like that. But why is this approach good? Why is this approach good? If you remember from the last time, I talked to you about JSX and how it gets converted into something called React.createElement. Now what React and its idiom is, or the thought behind React is, if I put it in simpler terms, that it's much faster to create, update and delete elements in React's way via create element on the React library. So React.create element and all the operations that I talked about further. So deleting, updating and managing nodes in the DOM is much faster when it's done via React rather than doing it directly on the DOM. So they have something that makes this process faster, and that whole thing sits inside this React DOM library. Now the name might be suggesting itself, but I'm gonna go ahead and explain this also. React DOM clearly points out that this library interacts with your browser DOM or document object model, and that is nothing but just a tree structure of nodes telling it where something lives and how to present that, or what are the childs of it, what are the values that you can expect from that, and so many more things, the parent of it, the childs of it, and so on. Now this library has the algorithm that does that DOM manipulation for you. So basically all the DOM manipulation that is happening is done by this library. So everything that is happening on the DOM manipulation side from React is done by this library, and that's why we see this reference to of render on this thing. Now in this library there are a lot of algorithms being written that check how to do whatever we desire to do, manipulating the DOM. On say you click the button and some value needs to be updated at 5 places. What is the minimum work possibility of achieving that? There are certain algorithms that do that, and they live inside this library. You don't need to have a concern with that, because all we need to do is we need to have this render method. Then we have this app, a component that we created, we imported from our own folder. Okay, if you don't know, if you are not familiar with this import, let me just go ahead and tell you how this works. So you have this import thing. Now it's a keyword, then you give it a name. Say you gave it a name called app, it's up to you. Then you tell it from where you want that to come. So what the syntax means is that, okay, what this dot means is that I want it to be in my current directory, because both of them live in the source directory. So app.js and index.js both live in the sources directory and at its root. So what it's saying is that, okay, in my current live directory, go ahead and look for something called app. Now what this app can be, this app can be three things. It can either be a JavaScript file, it can be a JSON file, and there is another possible extension, but I'm going to talk to you about that later. Now if say you want to import something else like CSS or something, then you have to be explicit about it. So you go ahead and say import. Now I'm leaving behind the named bit, and I'm going to tell you why, because in CSS specific case, In CSS specific case, you don't need a name, and when we are going to talk about styling, you will see why. But coming to React, see how you are importing React, giving it a name because you want to refer it in coming times. You are using a library called React. Now you might be seeing that there is no dot slash or whatever. Standard modules that are installed inside the node modules folder don't need that parameter thing or that particular sense of telling it exactly where it lives. If it's inside node modules, you can directly refer it with its name. Being that out of the way, say I will show you something more. Now there are two different things here. What I'm doing is I'm importing React, and then I'm using this strange syntax, and I am importing all that from React. So what is happening is, let me pull you back to this line. Now in React, you can export a lot of things out of an app. So whatever you want a user, whatever you think that a given file in JavaScript of yours will give out something useful to another module, or say in future somebody else will want to use that particular feature, then what you do is you export it without this default thing. So if I remove this default, then you export it. In that case, whatever specific name is given to that particular entity has to be used exactly the way it's written. So if I say export app, then I'm forced to import it as app. I can't import it as anything else. But when I use this default thing, then I can do whatever name I want to, because if I just import this file, I don't have to specify what I want from you. Default means that if somebody is importing this file without a name, just give them this bit, give them app. But if say I have another export called, say, my custom component, export my custom component, then I have to get that my custom component out specifically. Okay, get my point? Now what is this component thing doing right here, and what is the syntax? Now this syntax is called spreading in JavaScript, and this is a new syntax, and what it does is it asks React, and React being an object, inside here there is a reference to this object called React, and in that object there is a key or another object called component. Okay, so what I'm actually doing is I'm going ahead and asking the object, specific object inside React, and asking it if you have a component key inside you. Component being a complex object, and that is not a big deal, but it's a key. So what I'm saying is give me that component directly in something named component. Okay, this might sound really awkward, but think of it like that. You can replace this bit completely with React dot component. Happening here, we know this dot syntax, and this is used to get the value of a key out from an object. So React is the object, then I have another object, another key inside that object called component. I can use this syntax and it works exactly the way we expect it to, but say that will become really complex if we are referring something inside component, and say it's called A, and then there is something inside A and we want that, so it becomes quite complex to write it like that. So what we can do is, in React or in modern JavaScript specifically, we can use this spread thing. And what this spread means is that if say you have an object and you want to get a specific key out of it, then you can use curly braces, and inside that you can name all the keys that you want to get a reference to, and then you get those references stored as variables. Sounds okay? Now let's just move forward and continue with rendering. Now what will happen is, due to React DOM.render, we are binding the app. So all we see on the screen is this app. Now if I take your time and do a little demo, then what I want to do is I want to clean this up a little. So I'm going to clean this up here, and I'm just going to remove this, and I'm going to take you back to app.css. And if you see that I am concerned with these two classes, so this one and this one. So I'm just gonna do something, and I don't want you to like understand this completely in the first go, but I just want to call this app, and then I want to have another div called app header, and that's exactly this one. So I'm gonna copy this and paste it here, and I'm gonna correct my semantics because it's not correct right now. So I'll push this in, I'll push this in, I'll push this in, and then I'm gonna just push it out. Now let me just go ahead and open up my terminal and start our app. So how do we start our app? npm start. Now let's wait 2-3 seconds and this will pop up in our browser. Let's go back to the console and see if it's compiling or not. Okay, it tells, oh shoot, I deleted the references, so I'm gonna delete these. I didn't actually intend to delete those, but I just deleted it, and it's not actually gonna come a use to us right now, so I'm just gonna do it anyway. Now you can clearly see that my background is filled completely and I have text centralized, and that is because I'm using something called class name that is actually similar to giving classes. And if you know from HTML CSS, classes are used to give styles and formatting and more such things using CSS to components. So in components or in JSX specifically, you don't actually write just class, you write class name. And this is the biggest bug people stumble upon, is that they write class and then they get this error pointing them out to, okay, you're not supposed to use class in JSX, you're supposed to use class name, and then they fix it and then they are okay. But at times you don't realize that you written class somewhere, and then you might just stumble upon different things. You might check something, you might comment something, and then you suddenly realize after 5 minutes into the bug that okay, you just wrote class and you're supposed to write class name. So be aware of that in your subconscious, that you're not supposed to use class, you're supposed to use class name. Okay, simple styles here. I just wanted to use this because it has a minimum height of 100%. That means what I'm getting currently is I'm getting this whole screen. Okay, so whatever is the screen size of my browser right now, I'm getting that whole thing. Why I did that? Because I'm gonna do a little demo with you right now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna delete this for a bit. Okay, then we are gonna create something of a component. Now in this lecture I'm going to talk to you about components as well, and I'm going to talk to you about components in brief. Okay, so let's just make a component and call it constant nav button. Now from the name itself it's clear that this component is somehow related to giving us a button that is from navigation. Now I'm gonna do a trick, and I'm not gonna explain everything right here, but I'm gonna write something called props here. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna write a return, because I want to return JSX, because this is a functional component and it's responsible solely for UI. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna write a div, and then I'm gonna write another div, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a button inside here. Button. And on that button what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do two things. Actually, first what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use props, and inside that props I'm gonna have something called a name. And here what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bind this buttons on click to something that is also going to come from props, and it's going to call props dot toggle. So you already know that onClick takes a function. So one thing is clear, that props.toggle is a function, and another thing that is might be clear by now is props.name is a string. So let's use this and create a few buttons. So how do I do that? And before that, let me just go ahead and create a function called toggle. So there is toggle, and what toggle does is it just console logs I am toggle. If this, and yeah, I know nav button was never used, so nav button. Then I have a key called toggle that I'm gonna pass the function toggle. To pass the function, I need the proper syntax. Okay, so the other thing I need is name, and I'm gonna call this home. I'm gonna copy this and I'm gonna paste it 2 more times. So this might be about, and this might be a blogs. Now let's go back and see. Okay, it says toggle is not defined. Okay, I'm sorry, I need to use this here because it doesn't get the reference to toggle without me actually telling that this comes from this class. So if I don't use this actually search for a toggle method inside render, and if it doesn't find it, then it stops. But if you are using this here, then you are telling this, okay, don't look actually inside render, look inside the class I am currently in. I'm currently in the app class, so that's how it knows the toggle is inside the app class, and then we find the reference to it. If we just say toggle, then it's going to look for something called toggle inside render only. Okay, that is clear. Let's just go back and see. Okay, we got our 3 buttons. Now let's also pull up our console here, and let me just clear this and let's just test it. So yay, this works. Now you might just see 1, but it worked 3 times because there is a 3, and I can increase that number for you. So you can clearly see that number is increasing dynamically as I'm pressing the buttons, and it will keep increasing. This is a trick that the consoles do to avoid taking too much space. So I'm going to close this for now. We have completely successfully done our experiment. Now what I want to do is, this was relatively simpler, right? Let's do a little complicated exercise, and let me talk to you about that idea of having every single thing on this one page. I'm going to remove this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another component. So let's call it page builder, and all it does is it tells me what page I am at currently. So h1 gonna be props dot page name. Okay, and I'm not talking a lot about props right now because the next lecture is all about props and how you can use them in different scenarios. But you already know that how you are getting these variables inside, and in the previous lecture I also told you about how attributes get converted to props. So I can think, or I personally am having a feeling that you will understand this if I am not even telling you this in greater detail, because the use case we have right now is just converting our attributes to values that we can pass to our components. Now let's do page builder and do page name, and this is our home page. So home page. Now I'm going to save this and I'm going to go back, and it says home page. Let's just give it a space to home page. Cool. Now let's do 3 of these. Copy, paste, paste. Let's do about page, and let's do contact, contact us page. Now I have a problem. I see all 3 of these at the same time, but I don't actually want to do that. I just want to see one at a time. So let's do something that we have already done before, but let's build a mini routing system. So let's say constant current page, and let me tell you this, that this is just a thought experiment. This is not actually how it works inside the routing system, but I'm doing a fake routing system with you right now because I just want to show you how that idea might look like inside some library that we are going to use for routing, and how single page apps are solely just one single app that has multiple things inside it, and it gets rendered say conditionally. So let me write a comment here and tell what I'm going to do. So 0 means home, 1 means about, and 2 means contact. Okay, so I'm going to initially assign this 0, and I'm going to go back in my app, and now here I'm going to do something conditionally. So what I'm going to do is say if current page is equal to 0, then what I want to do is I want to show home page. I'm going to cut this from here and I'm going to place this here. What if this is not the case? Then what I'm going to do is, if say it's true, then it's good. If not the case, then I'm going to have another condition on current page. I'm going to check, say if that is 1, and if it's 1, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and say when this condition is true, then I want you to display the about page, and if that is even not true, then the only condition that I can think of remaining is that it's 2 and I am on my what page? Yes, you guessed it right, contacts page. And once I'm on my contacts page, I want it to be displayed like this. Now I just also want to clean the syntax a little more. So I'm going to put everything on a new line, and I'm going to push the conditional out, and I'm going to push this away. Okay, so this just to me is a cleaner model of how this was working. So we have a condition, then we have a true statement. If this condition is true, then this is going to work. If this condition is false, then this is going to work. Now this complete chunk is the false of this condition. Now if this condition is false, then we are also checking for another value, that is 1. So if that's true, then we are on our home page, and if that's not true, then we are on our contact us page. And this is our simple routing mechanism for our single page app. Now we have 3 pages and we have a routing mechanism so that we can route between those pages. I'll save this and I'll see what is happening. Currently my current page is 0, so it stays at home page. Now if I change this to 1, you will see what will happen. I'm on my about page now, and if I save it to 2, then I'm on my contacts page right now. So this is the basic idea of how routing and actually how anything inside our single page app will work. We'll have just one page. This is just our one page. This is just our one page, and inside that we are changing components depending on conditions. Now those conditions can be anything, and currently I'm using a hardcore approach, and I'm just changing values in the code to show you how things work. But when we are going to actually do routing in our app, in a project that we are going to make from scratch, that is going to be a real world project, This is gonna come in handy because then we are gonna have a mental model of how actually development inside React works. You have a simple HTML structure, and inside that structure you have a single point. Now from that single point called root inside index.html, as we looked, everything inside that is controlled by JavaScript. So what happens is, on this condition it gets compiled. This is the hardcore value and it currently finds which page it's supposed to be on. Then what will happen is it will convert this inside nodes from react.createElement, and then it will give that complete node structure to react dom.render, and react dom.render will paint that whole picture to HTML. Now React is powerful because those two steps are quicker than actually creating nodes in DOM and actually manipulating the DOM somehow. So say you are adding pipe somewhere, or you're doing something like that, you are actually incrementing a number or anything of that nature, comes from this idea, this notion of what is gonna happen when a certain condition is applied. Coming forward in the next lectures, I am going to remove this idea completely of hardcore values, because the second most powerful thing React does for you is update things quickly. React has this ability to update or do DOM updations faster and in a more efficient manner, and that's where React is more powerful. Now, in the rest of the time we have for this lecture, I want to play more with this page builder or thing, and let's actually make it so that we can have the sense, okay, we are building actually a page. So what my idea could be of a page, in my page what could I have is, I could have a heading, then I'll have a little paragraph that will tell me more about that page. So I'm gonna go and be like props dot description. Once prop dot description is done, then I might have a, or I might have a div, and this is gonna be, say this is the footer of the page. So I'm just gonna write the text. So this is the page footer, and footers are the things that are under the page and they're always similar. So carrying this idea forward of a footer, I'm also gonna have a heading, right? Because I want this to update, so I'm also gonna have this heading. So this is a heading. Now why I'm doing this right now is because I'm trying to get you comfortable with that notion of, say, that there are gonna be things like this called page builders, and how they work is, they basically have this idea of taking out things that are absolute common amongst all the pages. Say every page is going to have some sort of footer, and they're all in 90% cases same. Then there is heading and header actually. So I'm going to make it a header, and what a header is basically, say, your navigation bar in a real world example. So say this is your navigation bar, and the under here is the footer, and you have multiple sections, and say out of 10 sections you have on a page, 5 are similar. So you can actually code them once, and code them once in a component item. So this is a component right here we have. So I'm gonna actually go ahead and give each of our pages some description, and this is too long a text, so I'm gonna shrink it to description, DSC, and I'm gonna copy that. I just copied that, and I'm going to go down and I'm going to give my page a description. Welcome to the home page. And let's do this with other pages as well. So in the description side, let's say Hey there, so nice to see you. And let's just get it on the different line as well. And description is gonna be contacting us is super easy. Just fill the form. Okay, and now what I'm gonna see is that if I go back, and currently I'm on my contact page, and I have a header and I have a footer that is common amongst pages, and then have a heading, and then I have a description. Contacting us is super easy. Now on that note, let's just go ahead and change our variable to see if that brings some changes to our app. So we can clearly see that it's still updating properly as we want it to. Now on this note, I want to tell you something, that this approach is just static approach. In the next lecture we are going to use props that we are already using to some extent, and we are going to extend our knowledge by using something called state. And using those two, props and states, we are going to see how props and state change what is the current UI that is presented on the screen. Also, we are going to look on things that affect the UI, how changing something called a state or prop affects the UI. We are also going to look into something that will help us change things dynamically without going ahead and changing the variable values. It's as in the code. So on that note, I would like to take your leave for today, and I hope you enjoyed the lecture, and I hope to see you soon later. And we are going to do so much interesting stuff in the coming 2-3 lectures, and it's going to be super fun, and I hope you like it. See you. Bye bye.